Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to talk for a moment about coping with loss. So I'll just get right into it. I didn't intend on making this video. It's just something that kind of spontaneously popped into my head when I was in the kitchen a minute ago. So I grabbed the camera. As happens to me quite often, but this time I was thinking along the lines of how we cope with grief and loss. In fact, I really just started making a video before this, but I got interrupted, so I just deleted it. But it was about cats and the mystery of cats and this documentary that I watched, and I had my cat with me, Callie, who is the last remaining survivor of my cat family. We had a few cats, her and her mother and her grandmother, and as well as the dogs. We've had a few dogs over the past several years, but recently we lost 3 cats, including one we'd taken in, as well as our last dog. So it was kind of sudden, and she's like the last remaining survivor. And I was thinking about coping with loss and dealing with losing loved ones, and animals and people, of course. But all of this kind of just went through my mind at once, so I haven't really processed it myself. But I was thinking about what a confusing issue loss is. Losing something in our lives is a painful experience, and some people cope with it by being numb to it to an extent. No one's completely immune, but some people are overly sensitive on the opposite end of the spectrum, and they can never get over their loss and their grief. And I don't think we ever fully get over anything. It all changes us. That's the thing. We seem to think that there's some baseline you're going to get back to where you're going to feel the same. And if it's a serious loss, well, you wouldn't feel the same even if you didn't have the loss, because we're always changing. So, coping, I lost, for example, my father when I was 15, so it was a very prime time in my life, and I think that kind of set me up to be a little bit more numb to grief. But even at that time, I never really coped with it. I didn't even cry for at least a couple months, even at the funeral, or when I heard about it. And he had cancer, so it was expected, but still. And over time, one day I heard Nights in White Satin by the Moody Blues, because he loved music, and that was one of his favorite bands. And I just broke down crying. It was like that moment. And it's not that it's funny, because I do grieve, and I even cry watching, news, sad news or documentaries, especially early in the morning. It seems like that's when I'm at my emotional, sensitivity level, to where it's a good time to be emotionally balanced, but a little bit more sensitive, maybe. Anyhow, what I was thinking about wasn't just loss in people, but rather how it's such a confusing issue for people. We see people judging each other, by saying, oh, this person, doesn't grieve the way I do, so is there something wrong with me? Am I too sensitive, or are they not sensitive enough? And of course it comes down to the individual. But one of the interesting things I think we leave out is that we can also grieve over loss of items or ideas. And this can be a loss of religion, for example. Comes to that REM song comes to mind, Losing My Religion, which, of course, isn't really about losing your religion. It's metaphoric, but the idea that when we lose something that we really believed in or felt strongly about, like a person becomes disillusioned with their religion is a good example, and they may say, well, I've moved on, I used to be a Muslim, or I used to be a Christian, but or even I used to be an atheist and now I'm this. But people still grieve the loss of these things that we had because we felt so strongly about them. What about jobs, careers? I figure that's a good place to start. For example, I was a carpenter for many years, and I really liked what I did, but my back started getting worse and worse, to the point where my sciatic pain was so bad that I had just grown used to just limping around. At that time I was making my early YouTube videos back then, and I'd make them from the deck of the house I was working in, and showing the sunrise over Portland, and every morning it was just miserable getting to work. I had to give up my whole career, and a couple years later I was like, that's when I started my kratom business, and I was trying to find anything to try to get back to working. But I'm not a salesman kind of person. and I really loved being, you know, artistic. Now, it was partially my own fault, because I could have moved straight from that in, because I was doing cabinets and stuff. Once my back started feeling a little better, I really could have, I could still work from home and building wood, you know, sculptures or whatever. And I still can do that, but it's hard. It's really hard to move just right into something else when you're so used to having, you know, stability in that way. And anyhow, so I never really properly mourned the loss of not only my job or my career, but more the loss of my mobility, because that part really hurt. I mean, for a couple of years I literally couldn't stand up straight, and I couldn't sleep for more than a couple hours at a time. And I'm so grateful to feel better, but if I go out and help somebody move, you know, furniture or lift a desk or something the wrong way, and my back will be just back in pain. So yeah, we can mourn the loss of things that we had that were stability, like a career. It's just like somebody that you somebody that you knew well, you know, a good friend that's not a friend, but rather an idea. Or, you know, it's important to realize we're not our jobs, and that was the thing that I would never, when people ask, you know, what do you do? You know, first thing people say is, oh, I'm a banker, I'm a carpenter, I'm a whatever they do for a living, but that's not really what I do. I'm a philosopher, a thinker. Unfortunately, all the things that I really am, I don't get paid for, but that's okay. That's just life. So anyhow, I just wanted to put that out there and get the perspective out there that if you have lost something in your life that wouldn't be considered by a lot of people to be a loss, you know, because it's not a person or an animal. And I would beg people to rethink that idea. And to be able to properly let go of things, we have to grieve. Which means if we have lost something in our lives that meant a lot to us, it's okay to let go of it. And to say, hey, we can start over. We're never lost completely. So, but nothing, of course, nothing compares with the grieving of losing a loved one. So it almost doesn't even make sense to make a video talking about this, you know. Yes, you can grieve over the loss of things. Some people grieve over the loss of, you know, their fancy car that they crashed or something. I mean, people can grow attached to anything. I find my stuff is an extension of me, only to the extent that it keeps me busy and gives me something to do. You know, it's nothing, I'm not particularly fondly attached to things, but I do have some things, of course, that I am, and you can grieve the loss of those things too. Family heirlooms, or, you know, like I talked about fire the other day. Somebody said they had a house fire and they lost everything. I can relate to that. I've had 2 house fires. One we got out in time. The other one burned down my whole garage, which was my home at the time. I lived out there it was right after my dad had passed away. And a heater got left on or something, and I burned down my half the garage had been converted into my room. And I had all my stuff in there. I lost my stereo tape collection, memoirs, books, plus all the family heirlooms we had stored on the other side of the garage. So that's okay to grieve. That's a loss too. All the damn 8mm movies that we could have watched, old family home movies, really a drag, but that's the thing. You just let go. Just let it all go. It's all just stuff. People do matter much more than stuff. So anyhow, those are just some random thoughts. Hope y'all are doing well. I'll talk to y'all later. Have a wonderful day.